driving a DSG gearbox, you've got to bear in mind a few things about this gearbox. It's not a traditional automatic gearbox which uses a torque converter. The DSG, or any dual clutch transmission, has two clutches, one for the odd gears, one for the even gears. And because it's got a clutch, you have to be very conscious of the clutch being at the biting point as you move off and as you slow up. You certainly never want to be holding a DSG gearbox on a hill on the throttle, because in a manual you'd just be burning the clutch, and exactly the same thing happens in a DSG automatic. But repairing automatic DSG gearboxes proves to be very, very expensive. There's a lot more complexity there. Just to overgeneralize, really, there's two types of DSG gearbox from the Volkswagen group, which includes Audi, Seat and Skoda. The 7-speed boxes are much more attuned to performance, putting the torque down and fast acceleration, quick gear changes. The 6-speed is more refined, it's longer lasting, it's more durable, but not quite as exciting as the 7-speed. So we heard about a lot of problems on the 7-speed transmission. In fairness, these have been ironed out by the manufacturer. They've been aware of people's driving style, driving habits, and the mechatronic, the brain of the gearbox, has been adapted and tweaked to take into account many of those idiosyncrasies and just smooth out the abuse that drivers were giving the gearbox. So they're much more protective of themselves now than they ever used to be. One feature of the DSG gearbox is creep. So as soon as you lift your foot off the brake, the car will creep forward. That's useful for pulling away in traffic. You just need to be conscious to keep your foot on the brake. If you're in traffic, should you use the park position? Should you move it to neutral? Or should you just keep your foot on the brake? Well, using park is generally only considered appropriate for actually parking the car. It locks the transmission and prevents it from moving. Moving away when it's in the park position can create a bit of a delay, a bit of frustration. Drivers tend to fumble moving out of park into drive when they're moving in traffic. So never use park when you're in traffic. Now, moving to neutral and using the handbrake will stop the glare coming from the brake lights of the car behind. And I personally would use that if I was having extended stops in traffic at night. If it was daytime, however, I would just keep my foot on the foot brake and even use the handbrake. Now, these cars are equipped with a stop-start system, and that's quite useful because it protects the DSG gearbox by switching the engine off when you don't need it. And in this A330 TFSI, it actually anticipates when I'm going to need the engine. I didn't do anything. The car in front of me started pulling away and the engine started. So the car actually reacted before I did, and it was ready to move off. So there was no significant delay at all because I used the stop-start system. The way the stop-start is programmed now, it's much more sensitive. It allows the engine to warm up properly. If you've been doing extended spirited drives, it knows if it should keep the engine running a little bit to allow everything to cool down. So don't overthink it. Don't be too worried about using the stop-start system. Now, neutral should never be used when the car is moving along. Just switching from neutral to drive really upsets the gearbox. If I was the gearbox, I'd be grumpy because I wasn't designed to work like that. It doesn't make a lot of sense to suddenly go from neutral with the engine spinning and the gearbox not moving into drive and the gearbox suddenly being picked up at a pace. So avoid using neutral to save fuel on hills. That's a really naughty habit that you should never do in a DSG gearbox. Drive mode or sport mode, it's a big debate among people as to which is best, which is most appropriate. Personally, I find if I drive gently in sport mode, I get improved fuel economy from most DSG gearboxes than I do in the drive mode. But the drive mode and the economy mode is designed to make compensations for drivers' habits to back off things and reserve a little bit of extra fuel so you can get the MPG up. But if you're a good driver, you'll be doing that automatically. So there really is no need to rely on the car to provide that additional assistance. You can probably make better decisions yourself. The Volkswagen group tend to use the DQ 200 and the DQ 250 gearbox. The DQ 250 is reserved for the performance models. The DQ 200 is generally for the lower performance models. Now, when it comes to care and maintenance, I would strongly recommend, if you have the DQ 250, to get the gearbox oil or the transmission fluid changed fairly regularly. Every 40 to 50,000 miles is recommended. It's going to depend on your driving style. If you're a very gentle driver, you can push that ahead. If you're an aggressive driver and the gearbox transmission fluid is dealing with a lot of heat build-up, then I would shorten those and get that done more regularly. Please ignore the Sealed for Life recommendation on those DQ 250s. You really do need to keep on top of the transmission oil changes. On the DQ 200s, it's not as vital. When you drain the oil off a DQ 200, it still looks pretty good. And again, that's going to depend to some extent on how the car is driven. But the lower power output, the wet clutch nature of the 6-speed transmissions means that the gearbox oil or the transmission fluid has a longer lifespan than it does in the more performance-oriented models. So what are the advantages of a DSG gearbox? Well, gear changes are instantaneous. The fuel economy is better. Generally, on a DSG gearbox, you are getting 15% better fuel economy than your average manual driver can achieve, just because you've got better ratios, faster gear selection, and the mechatronic unit is really nicely designed now, and it does choose an appropriate gear for the speed you're going to maximize economy, particularly if you're driving gently in sport mode or if you're in a specific economy mode. Be aware of odd noises. If the car starts jerking or you get rough gear changes, you need to attend to that very, very quickly and just make sure you're not going to run up a big bill for yourself. Another thing we should avoid doing is just driving too aggressively all the time. We've got to give the transmission fluid a little bit of a time to warm up and also to cool down. If it gets too hot through lots of gear changes and lots of spirited driving, it's going to degrade the quality of that fluid and we're going to start to have problems. If you use manual mode and the flappy paddles, just be conscious of using the right gear. Let the gearbox do its thing, accept its recommendations as you go along. But if you do need to drop down a gear and you anticipate an overtake or something, then do that. But be conscious of matching the speed and RPM and being in an appropriate gear and you're rolling along nice and controlled. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please boot that like button. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. And I've lined up these videos that you should find really interesting.